Everybody, welcome to the Android DevRel office hours in your EMEA friendly time zone. I'm Sparky, and I'm joined today by, as usual, Rich and Nick from the London office. And as a very special guest, we also have Trevor from Mountain View.
Hi everyone. And we're very happy to welcome Spider to London today, live here in the Hangout with us. In Google London. You'll load up the moderator.
Yes, my moderator is too impatient, is not waiting for us. So, before I bring up the moderator, does anybody have any questions you would like to ask us on the air that we can answer for you right away?
And actually, before we get started, I should remind everyone, if you're not speaking, could you please mute your microphone? Because we do record these, and there's a lot of background noise right now.
And a lot of you tell.
Actually, look at our microphone. Can people actually hear us? Our microphone is not. Our microphone is registering about nothing. No, it is. If you look there, it is.
You guys are coming through perfectly clear.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The top's not. That's right. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. Okay. Cool. 4 of us is loud enough.
I should think so. So, first question. Tal, do you have any questions?
Should we jump straight into the moderator? Have you got the moderator up there?
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Cool. Somehow I've got a device that doesn't have Google Plus installed. Okay. And here we go.
All right, so let's start off with the first moderator question then. First question is, there's no good way to create a map view inside a fragment. What is the recommended way to use both maps and fragments? And will we get a map fragment sometime in the future? There is not currently a map fragment. We will not comment on future developments, but for the time being, we would say if you need to combine a map view and a fragment, the way to do it is to put it into an activity that displays in front of or on top of your fragments. In other words, for example, put it in something like a dialogue activity, some sort of an activity with a transparent background.
Right. It's not going to be the same as a fragment. You won't be able to display it at the all the time in place of a fragment. What you can do is you can have a button to go and bring it up and make it like a pop-up. Now, I will say we are aware of this issue, and it is something that we'd certainly like to see fixed at some point, but like Sparky said, we can't actually comment on roadmaps, so, but it is something that we know is a pain point, so just stay tuned. All right.
No more questions from kids. Anybody asking to get in?
I've got one to fire at you. I integrated Facebook into my app, and I used the Facebook SDK, and I put in a button, to connect using a single sign-in. But for some strange reason, on the XML I see the button, but on the Android device I don't see it, which is quite strange. But it's there because if you press it, it does the function, but you don't see it. You don't see the image.
Okay, so the control is there, it's just not rendering for some reason.
What did you say? There's a bit noise in the back.
Yes, just a reminder for the person who just joined, please be sure to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. So your problem is that the button is the control is present, but there's just no graphics being rendered.
Yes, I don't see the image, but it's all present. So.
That's a good question. I'm not sure what would cause that off the top of my head. Now, my first instinct would be to use the hierarchy viewer tool to go and take a look and see what your view actually looks like, and see if there's anything you can find out from that. I'm not entirely sure if that's going to actually tell you everything you need to know, but that's probably a good place to start debugging. Anything else you could actually debug that?
Double check the drawables maybe. Is it possible that you're missing a drawable in a resolution that's not auto-scaled from one of the other resolutions?
No, because I've got a drawable file that is generic for all resolutions.
Okay.
And on the XML, when I use the XML editor, I do see the button, but not on the Android device.
Which device are you using?
Galaxy Nexus.
Have you tried any others?
Yeah, Galaxy S2.
And both are on Ice Cream Sandwich?
No, one on ice cream, one on gingerbread.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to suggest making sure hardware acceleration was turned off just for the test. But if one's on gingerbread, you should be alright.
So it's quite strange that this kind of thing.
Yeah,
and it's a component that came from Facebook, so that's even more strange.
So I think, yeah, hierarchy view is the way to go, just to ensure it's actually in your kind of views hierarchy.
Yeah. And after that, be sure to take a look at how your activity is being created and how you're inflating your view. Make sure that you're actually, there's nothing odd about the way things are structured that would prevent that from being rendered. I can't think of any concrete examples off the top of my head that's in your code, but something is definitely fishy there. I've never seen that before. So somewhere I suspect there is an error in your code. I just don't know what.
Well, I'll tell you, what I did try to solve it is to put it as a source, not to put it as a background, but to put it as a source image, if you see what I mean. And when I did that, it actually showed the image, but not at the correct resolution. It showed only part of the image. So it's very strange.
Are you using a single image, or are you using a 9-patch drawable?
No, I'm using a PNG image.
I think we've given all the advice we can from this end. Get the hierarchy viewer and check it out and see what your hierarchy looks like.
Thank you.
If there's something crazy going on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good luck.
Good luck. Next on the moderator.
No. Well, we have another participant in the call. I see I don't have your name. Did you have a question for us?
What was the name of the third guy?
It's Manesh. I think it's Manesh from last week who...
yes, of course. Manish, hey.
I wasn't on last week.
Did you have a question for us, Manish? Okay.
Alright, yeah.
Alright, let's look at the next moderator question. Now that client login authentication is deprecated, should we use OAuth 2.0 for C2DM messaging?
If you hit the presentation view, they won't shoot around like that.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Would be great to have an example of how to get an auth token with OAuth to use the C2DM. Yes, it would be great to have an example. So
I think there is one in the Google APIs library.
Yeah, the G-task.
There's an example for doing it with tasks, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll actually say OAuth. How to say this? We haven't officially supported OAuth for C2DM, so it is possible. There is a way to do it. We have not released code yet because it's not officially supported. There are some third-party examples out there that show you how to do it, but I'm actually going to, say something to the contrary of the answer that was posted earlier, and actually say, at this time, I would actually not worry too much about this, and just stick with client login, assuming your code is already using client login. If you're using OAuth, that's cool. But I wouldn't go out of your way to change this code at this time, at least until we post some more examples up there showing you how to do it, and then we can give it official support. So for now, the official way to use C2DM is still client login. Despite the fact that client login may be deprecated, that doesn't mean that you can't use it, and it will still continue to work until we have a solution in place for you guys. So let me rephrase that. There's no rush.
no rush to phase out client login.
For this particular service. Everything, just because we don't officially support it. I don't want to go having you guys go and try and figure out how to add this before we've actually updated our docs. That's not probably very productive. So, yeah, I'd stick with what the docs actually officially say, which is client login.
Sit tight, keep on keeping on.
Right.
Okay. Now, where's this presentation module?
It's at the very top of the page.
Really?
Right there.
Okay. All right, let's lock these guys in. Maybe this will stop my screen from sleeping too.
No, you need to. There's some other apps you have to install. I can show you after the show.
Right. Let's see. Any more live questions before we go to the moderator again?
And if you're following along on YouTube Live as well, feel free to post questions in the Google Plus post, kind of announcing the Hangout. and we'll read those out from there as well. So,
Do we want to open up the sidebar for chat?
You probably should. There is a chat message in there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's Manish saying hello.
Manish says hello. Hi, Manish.
he's now gone.
Well, he could be watching. Outside of the live stream. So.
Would you guys recommend developing an App Engine component in order to give access to Google Drive from Android, or is there another approach you guys can think of that would work?
Well, there is the Google Drive app, which I actually haven't played around with very much, but does it allow you to open a file in there in a third-party app?
I don't think so yet.
I don't think it's got any intent receivers that are publicly published, so it's kind of limited on what it can provide to third-party apps, I think.
Okay. That's a good question, actually. I know I had met with the Drive folks back when they were doing their initial development, and I had recommended that they do something along these lines. Clearly, they haven't done that yet. Maybe they will at some point in the future. I can't speak for them. But as an interim solution, it's probably not a bad idea. With the caveat that I have no idea what the roadmap is, so it's entirely possible they might add those broadcast receivers at some point in the future and add additional functions to the Google app, which would make that more redundant. But again, I don't know if they're going to do that or not. So
Sure.
If you need something in the short term, it's not a bad way to go.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't give you a more concrete answer there, but as usual, not only can I speak for the roadmap on the Android side, I actually really don't know what they're doing. So.
Sure, no worries.
I can give them advice, but... All right, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, the next question is, I would like to be able to identify whether or not my app is in the foreground. I managed to do it by ref counting, etc., etc. And Dirk in Berlin says you could use activity.hasWindowFocus if you want to know for a certain activity. We like that idea. So what Dirk said.
Yeah, that said, there is a second way you can do this too. You can just monitor for on pause and on resume. So it depends on what your app's doing, and which method makes sense. It really will depend on what the context is. So for example, you might want to use the activity has window focus method, assuming that say like you're a service and you're trying to decide whether like if the download's in progress in the background, display a notification, but if it's in the foreground, the app's taking care of it. That could be one use case where you wouldn't want to use on pause and on resume because it's just more clumsy. But if maybe you want to go and actually, have your UI suddenly change when a transparent activity comes up on top of it, in that case, on pause and on resume would make more sense. So it's both approaches are valid, and it just depends on what your app's doing. All right,
That's good. The next question, the moderator. What is a base context? How does it differ from an activity context in the application context, and when should I use it?
That's true.
So, get base context is part of the context wrapper class, which according to the documentation is a proxying implementation. In other words, it hands off the actual work to be done to some other more concrete version of context, like an activity or an application or service, something like that. So you could sort of think of it kind of like you would think of an abstract base class. And according to the people who wrote the framework, you should not be concerning yourself with get base context yourself. You should simply get the context of whatever you're in at the time that you need a context. Typically your application context, service context, something like that. And if you need a context in some class that's not part of it, pass it in.
right.
But also be mindful about leaking those contexts. So if you're passing contexts around, you really need to be careful about leaking those contexts, as in making them live longer than they need to. So a common mistake is using an activities context when creating a toast, which you don't really want to do. You probably want to pass the application context and so on and so forth.
Right. And you don't want to save those contexts when you pass them around. You should call get context when you need it, and then let it go as soon as you're done.
All right. There's a question from chat here from Manish. He asks, is there any tool for creating Android application user interface? What type of tools or IDE should be used for game development, such as Drow, Effective Droid, but it's not, the rest of the question sort of cut off there. More typing.
Okay.
Well, we can go ahead and start answering the first part of your question while you're typing there.
DrawDroid.
DrawDroid, okay. So there is actually a tool built into Eclipse, which is part of the ADT plugin for Eclipse, which we actually developed. And it's a drag-and-drop WYSIWYG editor that allows you to go and create views. There are, as you mentioned, there are other tools. DroidDraw is one I've used myself. And then also there are some tools such as IntelliJ that won't let you create the UI, but will allow you to preview them. Now, my personal view on all of these is they're really awesome for prototyping and getting the initial framework for your app set up. But at some point, you're going to have to go and edit XML because these tools, quite simply, don't give you the expressiveness that you need to really create a really compelling UI. I also find a lot of developers, when they use them, tend to use them as a crutch. And the result is you get really ugly-looking UIs. So, with that in mind, I'd say probably the first thing you should do before you even open up a UI editor is open up Photoshop or OmniGraffle.
Or a notebook.
Or a notebook. Start out wireframing your UI. Make something that's just looking at the information hierarchy within your app, how things are laid out, how you position things, where the user is going to be looking, where their attention should be. And then from there, take that and actually go and make detailed mocks in something like Photoshop. We do have some stencils and icon packs available on the Android design site that can help you out there. But, be thinking more beyond just what the stock widgets are, right? Of course, we do encourage you to use those whenever possible. But, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't make your app look ugly, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't ever create any 9 patches and, open up a graphic editor, if you're just doing nothing but dragging text views and buttons onto your app, unless your app is pretty simple, it's probably not. Actually, I'm trying to think of the simplest apps I know, and say like Clock or Settings app. And even those, there's custom assets that need to be designed, right? So it's just way too easy to go and overlook all that stuff unless you mock up your UI first in Photoshop, is what I found.
I think the other problem with these drag-and-drop editors is they force you to think about one particular size and aspect ratio at a time. Like, when you're looking at, a distinct size, you're kind of thinking in that, and you kind of stop thinking about, what if the user's on an X large device or a smaller screen device or something else. Whereas I find actually looking at XML a lot easier to think extensively, to think about how things are docked against certain edges and will stretch, and how things will move around on the screen in different sizes. So while the Eclipse ADT plugin does give you some great options for, changing the device, even the OS version in which the app will run on, and showing you what it will look like, I often find that, like Trevor says, it's great to bootstrap, but then I like to switch to the XML and actually really work with the XML and really get my head around how the UI is going to adapt to different devices as well.
Right. Along those lines too, a common mistake I'll see people make with those WYSIWYG editors is to turn on absolute layout, which you really don't want to do. I can't think of very many good uses for absolute layout, to be honest.
Nope.
I'm sure maybe there's some obscure use case where it actually makes sense, like a fixed width dialog. But even then, I don't know. Yeah,
it's been deprecated right in favor of frame layout, right?
Right. Yeah. Stay away from absolute layout if you can. And by if you can, I mean always.
So I would also say that the other tools you've mentioned, like DrawDraw, are a little bit old now, whereas the ADT plugin is getting active development. So I think the great thing about giving that tool a try is if you have any feedback, then drop by the tools.android.com page, and you can give feedback to Zav and Tor, to the guys on the tools team who are actively making it and working out in the open. It's all there in Git. You can see exactly what they're working on and contribute and give feedback.
Yeah, and I will say along those lines, the ADT plugin is certainly getting better. So, while I'm still going to stand by what I said and say that you still eventually will probably have to use XML. Hopefully, we can get over time you'll be able to do more and more in that graphical layout editor to get started, because it certainly is a great tool to go and get your initial layout down. But don't rely on it as your only source for designing a layout.
Paper and pencil, often the best place to start. And the second part of your question about type of tools or IDE for game development. That's quite an expansive question. It really depends on the kind of game you're using. So games developers often aren't really using the Android kind of like drawing toolkit. So a very popular choice is something like Unity, which is a very, very powerful engine for creating your games and comes with a complete IDE solution and so on and so forth. Or you might be using a certain physics library which might come with its own kind of like tools or domain-specific language or something like that. So it really depends on the type of game you're building, and then the tools which will be best suited for that type of game, and then they may have their own constraints. Anyone else got any good suggestions for game development tools and IDEs?
Real game developers write their own tools.
I'm not going to say that. Unity is actually very popular, so I'm going to second that opinion. I know there was what's it called?
There's AndEngine, which is
that's what I was thinking of.
yeah, the open source
I
one.
think it was like Ant something. No, AndEngine. That's the one. Yeah, so AndEngine is another very popular one that I've heard good things about. I haven't played around with that one myself, but I do know there are quite a few apps out there that do make use of it, and some of them are quite fun to play. So another one you'd want to look at.
Yeah, I think I might have played 1 or 2 games that were pretty good, were based on Box 2D as well. So, yeah.
And of course, if you do want to write your own game engine, you are welcome to. But I wouldn't feel bad about using any of the prepackaged ones, because there is a lot of work that goes into creating a game engine. And sometimes, if it's a matter of getting your app out onto the market, it's sometimes being fast is good.
And to that point, if you are tempted to create your own one and you really, really want to do that, I would take a look at Replica Island as well, which is an open source game from a former colleague called Chris Pruitt, which will be able to bootstrap a lot of the gotchas and get your game running and so on. So it's a good place to start from.
Right, and Chris is Google I/O talks on writing compatible games are also worth your time. Right.
Do we have another live participant?
Thanks, Al.
Yeah. Any more questions from the viewers in the Hangout?
No. Okay, let's go on with the moderator one.
Oh, I think we better have a question from the Hangout because my screensaver just kicked in again.
Yeah, I've got moderator here as well.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so what is the best scheme to manage global bears? Should I save them to disk when objects and to preferences when primitives from the app, so when Android destroys processing and return to the app, you won't find null values in your global bears? I tend to not really like serializing objects, and I don't really like working with a file system either, so my advice is to park it all in global, in shared preferences. But maybe somebody else has other...
I think that's usually the best advice, is make use of shared preferences. Now, you certainly can serialize your objects and store them that way. You could even store them inside of shared preferences if you feel...
possible.
If you really want to. But I think usually the easiest option is just to go and use shared preferences. So that would be my advice.
So is this when the app is destroyed and recreated?
Correct.
So you might want to look at the save state, like on save instance state and so on. So that will give you a really easy way to persist your state. So if it's just like the device has been rotated, it might seem a bit heavyweight to actually flush those all to disk. You might want to just use the on save instance state and on restore instance state instead.
The main trade-off that I see is whether you, in cases like changing the orientation, whether you want to use the on-save instance state, or whether you simply want to catch that orientation change signal and not have your activity get recycled.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, you can do the on configuration change and then request the layout yourself instead of waiting for that.
One of the good things about shared preferences as well is there's the shared preference backup helper, which means you can back up some of those preferences to the cloud, and if someone restores your app to a different device...
It's absolutely true.
Yes, please do that. But even if you do have to serialize it to disk, then you can still have the file backup helper, which will help you do the same thing.
Yeah. Actually, it's probably worth mentioning that a little more, too, because I think a lot of viewers actually don't know about the backup service. So Android provides an API, which is in our developer documentation, which allows you to take a set of preferences and mark it as something which should be backed up. There's then a backup manager on the device, which will take that data and write it somewhere. Depending on what type of device you have, a lot of times it gets backed up to Google's cloud associated with your Google account. Which means that, yes, if you do buy a new device, or heaven forbid, you manage to throw your device and get a replacement one, we're able to just go and push those settings back on for you. So it's really easy to use. You do have to register for a developer to do. There's instructions on doing it on our site. But it's a free service, and you just go mark your data as something that should be backed up, and then you take care of the rest. It's really easy to use. So if you haven't ever looked at it, please do. It's actually really awesome.
It's a great user experience as well when you kind of get a new device and all the apps get restored and you open it up and all your favorite preferences are just set because it's a diligent developer has gone and used this shared preferences backup helper. It's great.
Yeah. Now I will say I really wish Angry Birds had this feature because I can't count the number of times that we go through a lot of devices here at Google as we're going and testing different both different hardware as well as different software builds. And the number of times I've had to restart from level 1.1 on Angry Birds is just sad. There is actually a command line tool to back up your phone, but it's for something that's actually usable to end users. We really want to encourage cloud backup. So if anybody from Rovio is watching, you said cloud backup to Angry Birds. I will love you.
And the command line tool only works with Ice Cream Sandwich, right? Or is there something working there?
That's actually a good question.
Well, there's root users, there's Titanium and so on. So.
Yeah.
Can't you just basically copy the Angry Birds files to your new phone and maybe it will catch on?
Yeah, but you need root access, right?
Why do I need root access but Angry Birds doesn't?
No. You don't need root access for the backup service.
No, not for the backup service, sorry.
But if you want to copy the files yourself.
No, but to copy the files manually, you either need root access or Ice Cream Sandwich.
Really? Because Angry Birds doesn't need, so why do I need? Because we are on equal ground. Because if let's say I download the Angry Birds on two different phones, and then when I add my advanced game, then I transfer to the new phone, I can just basically use the Astro File Manager or any other file manager and just copy the files from point A to point B. And
no, not if you have a rooted phone, you can, and if you store settings to SD cards, you can. But if you store settings within the data folder, which is the default, that folder is off limits to users, and you cannot access that through Astro File Manager or anything else for that matter.
Well, I can write a program that accesses this.
Sorry?
If Angry Birds wrote the program that accesses it, I can write a program that accesses it and transfers it.
It might not be Angry Birds accessing those files. It may be the package manager or the preferences manager that's accessing those areas.
Well, yeah, so I wouldn't want to have to go into Angry Birds and select transfer game. If you use the backup service, everything happens automatically. It's a much better user experience. Yeah, so especially when you start having 40, 50 apps on your phone, which is at least common for me. I don't want to have to transfer 50 apps worth of state manually.
Yeah, I think on my personal device, I'm up over 100 now.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting widget. Just or like have a scoreboard of who has the most apps installed.
Ooh, app install leaderboard. Wow.
So we've had a question come in on the chat thread from Google Plus, from David Schmidt. What do you guys think about Mono for Android? I personally never used it myself. Have any of you ever
I haven't
Mono
used
for
it.
Android?
I mean, personally, I'm all for people who want to go and experiment and try new languages. I think our official position has always been that the official language of Android is the Java programming language, and if that doesn't do what you need, there is the NDK. But if third-party developers want to go and write alternative implementations, that's certainly something that they're welcome to do, and is awesome in my opinion.
Yeah, as a former C# developer as well, I've played around with it a little bit. But like Trevor says, there's always a delay as well whenever we kind of update them to the latest SDKs. It has to filter through and it has to get invokes and so on to get the latest functionality into Mono. So it takes a little while.
One of the nice things about having an open platform is that you are able to go and do these things. So
I think the major drawback at the moment is that they have to bundle the runtime in every single application at the moment, right? So each app gets quite large.
Yeah, you would. That is a concern. Now, app size isn't as much of an issue as it used to be since there is the support for APK expansion files, but it does still take up space on the user's device, and not all users have phones with 16 gigs of space or more yet. I still have quite a few friends who are on Nexus 1s, and those phones, as much as I love it, it's a great piece of hardware. The internal storage is a bit dated now, just as far as the amount of space available.
And bear in mind, the transfer time as well. Even with these large expansion files packs, part of the user's experience starts from the market listing, and then when they hit download, there's a time to wait, especially if they're on cellular data. So I think it's a generally good practice to keep your app as small as possible to keep it really kind of like fast.
I think another problem with it is you actually have to pay for it. Looking at the website, you have to pay $399 just to make use of it.
For Xamarin?
Yeah, there's an evaluation version for free, but developers are going to have to sort of shell out $400, and one of their packages is $1,000 just to develop and deploy an application in market which uses it. I think until that comes down, it's going to be a bit of a barrier to developers who want to put C# and similar applications onto Android.
Yeah, so unless you've got a lot of application logic or business logic already in C# or some other language, and you're trying to make some kind of cross-platform play, then I can't really see much value there.
Alright. So we have another question on chat here from Anish again. How can I connect to a server with a web service file of any Android application? I would like to use Gmail login authentication. I'm not sure what you mean by web service file. Can you give us a bit more information about what you're asking?
Tell me about WSDL.
Should I queue up the next question from moderator while Anish takes that in? Okay.
So I can talk a little bit about the second half of that question. Gmail login authentication. I assume you mean Google account authentication, because you don't have you don't log into Gmail with a Gmail account. You log into Gmail with a Google account. Now, we do have Account Manager, and Account Manager allows you to go and request a client login token from your Google account, which you can then pass to a third-party service to go and access something. Now, granted, this is more for authorization rather than authentication. So, you can get a token for, say, Google Calendar, which has the service ID CL, and pass that to the Google Calendar API and access the Calendar API. Let's see, what are some other ones? Google Spreadsheets, for example, has the service ID WISE, and you can go and use that to go and access your spreadsheet data. Now, if you are a third-party app and not Google Calendar or Google Spreadsheets or some other Google service, in that case, things get a little more tricky, because what you want to do there is not authorization, you want to do authentication, which is more the realm of OpenID rather than client login or OAuth. There is one workaround I can think of, and that is to write your own App Engine app. So if you write your own App Engine app, you can get a client login token for App Engine, pass that to your app, and then have your app go and exchange. Either actually, if you build all your logic into App Engine, then that's perfect. You're set. But if your app doesn't live in App Engine, you can then have your App Engine app go and exchange that for a token valid for your web service. So possibly use. I should think X509 certificates would be a great use case there. Have a signing certificate on your server, and then create a certificate that says this is John Doe at gmail.com, which you have then authenticated using the client login token. So App Engine is a great window into the Google login system, and you can go and write code that'll go and perform additional functionality there. It is probably a little more work than it should be, so hopefully at some point that'll get better. But I don't think it's that hard to actually implement. So you can probably do it in, 20, 30 lines of code at the most? Not even that. I mean, the actual process of authenticating a user is actually very straightforward. There is code out there. You just go and pass it to your client login token, and it'll exchange it for an App Engine session cookie, which you can then go and just use to access your apps if you had authenticated via the website. So, yeah. Probably a bit more detail than you wanted to know about App Engine there.
Does the ADT include the features that I remember seeing at I/O last year for creating project templates for both the App Engine and the Android project?
It does, in fact. I'm glad you brought that up. If you download, I can't remember if it's part of ADT or the Google plugin pack for Eclipse, one or the other, but we do have a plugin that allows you, or an Eclipse Android/App Engine template.
Connected Android.
Yeah, I think it's actually. I think it's part of the GWT plugin pack actually, because it will allow you to go and use GWT to expose, or it allows you to expose APIs from your GWT app in a way that makes them very easy to use with Android. And I think it even ties in with CQDM as well. So it's definitely worth taking a look at. It's I haven't had a chance to actually build an app with it myself, but I've heard good things about it, so give it a try. All right, so move on to the next question.
So we have a question in the moderator here that says, what is the difference between using @ to reference a resource or ? E.g., item name equals Android : divider, @ Android drawable action bar divider, etc. Is this documented in the software? And Dirk in Berlin says, according to Rito Meyer's book, Android provides a shortcut to enable the use of styles from the currently applied theme. To do this, use ? Android rather than @ as a prefix to the resource. And we agree with what Dirk said. So, and then it's referenced in the documentation under reference Android R attribute action bar style. So, and this will be in the moderator, so you can come back to the moderator even as recently as now and see this question fully written out. So,
You actually have to use the down arrow, or it will still let the questions move around. Because that's no when you're actually reading. You have to hit down too.
yeah.
You do. Wait, are you?
I'm not using presentation mode because it hides all of my annotations on the answers.
Ah, yeah, that it does.
Right. Another theming question. Using theme hollow light in autocomplete text view dropdown, text color is white. I tried using Dustin Sister workaround, it didn't work. I'm using Action Bar 2. Shouldn't overriding the text color work? Yes, it should. There was a framework bug that should have been fixed in Android 404. So if you're using 404 and above, you shouldn't have this problem with the white text. And if you are in 404, let us know.
Okay. Looks like Manish has some updates, but he's still typing. So we're going to let you keep typing, and then we'll come back to your question.
Yeah.
Can I file a question?
Please do.
Yeah.
A quick one. With the network's APN, does it be, when you put in a SIM card, it adds the APN automatically? Does that depend on Google or on my mobile carrier?
That's a good question. So when you insert a new SIM card, it has.
I think it depends on the SIM.
I want to say I think it's on the SIM card. I think it mostly depends on the carrier.
It depends mostly on my carrier. Okay, because we have here 2 new carriers that started yesterday, and when I put in the SIM card, there's no data of APN. So I thought.
Well, I once had a situation where I had a prepaid SIM, and the APN information was not populated by the carrier, and I was able to find a list of APN data strings in basically in the sources for CyanogenMod, and I was able to populate my APN based on that just by manually typing in the config on the phone.
Or your carrier's help pages.
Well, but this carrier only started yesterday, so I seriously doubt Cyanogen already closed up.
So if you find code in CyanogenMod, then that means that there's probably code in AOSP, which means that there probably is a number of some, at least to some extent, populated APNs on the phone. But yeah, I'm not actually entirely sure where the line is drawn here as far as what comes on the phone and what goes on the carrier. Unfortunately, that's not really an app development question, so nobody here is actually going to be able to give you the supportive answer for that. That's really a question for the framework team. That's more a question of development. And unfortunately, we don't have any representatives from that team. All from the app development side.
Of course, okay. Just wanted to check.
Just as a quick aside on that, if you check out the AOSP, you'll find the APN config list in development data ECT. There are some there, but it is on the SIM and can be overridden by carriers.
Okay, that's good information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we look at Manisha's question? My application, I want to log in with my Gmail ID, and after that I want to upload a file onto the web server through this application. I've created a WSDL file and uploaded it. What should I do for further process?
Oh boy, so. Yes, so honestly, I think I'd have to see your code to actually give you some more information here, because if you're having a problem with server connectivity, I'd want to know why, and to know that I need to see what you're trying to do. So maybe if you could post a question on Stack Overflow, give us a bit more detail about what you're trying to do, actually post some code snippets, we can give you a hand there. Post a link to your Stack Overflow question in the comments for the stream, and we'll take a look at it after. Yeah, that sounds like it's probably a bit more detailed than we can go into during the live stream, though.
So, and there's the link from Al. Thank you very much.
Yeah. For those who are not watching live, I'll just post a link to the Android source. So it looks like development, what is that? Oh, yeah, platform development, blob, master, data,
etc.
It's a GitHub URL.
Actually, blob is GitHub. That's not us. I was going to say, where do we have blob? Yeah, so platform development, data, etc, APNs, conf.xml.
Yeah, there's quite a number in there, but I doubt they'll have the new Israeli ones.
Yeah. So
Submit a patch.
next question on the moderator is from Tomas in Prague, who says, is there any way to detect whether my APK was modified? Anti-LVL uses hooks that replace calls of packet manager, I/O operations, reflection, etc. A lot of tricks from the Pirates and Vampires talk from last year's I/O are worked around. Unfortunately, if your client is compromised, then there's basically nothing you can do to ensure that the code on the client is unmodified.
Right.
Because like anything you can do to say checksum the code or whatever, the compromised code on the client can catch that and just send back a fake return value.
Before I should mention the Pirates and Vampires talk. For those of you who are not familiar with that, was a talk that was given at Google I/O last year by myself and Dan Galpin, mostly Dan. Now, if you watch that talk, I think whoever's asking this is missing one of the important messages from that talk, and that is that the LVL is not bulletproof. There are some things you can do to make it much better and can actually strengthen your app significantly. There are some things that actually are unbreakable. And I put that. I'm going to say that with caution because there's who knows, somebody might hack your server, right? But at least in theory, are unbreakable. But that being said, for most work that you're going to do on the client side to go and prevent piracy, really all you're doing is you're buying yourself time before your app is pirated. Because again, client code can't be trusted, and which means that somebody, if they're really determined, you can make it really hard. But if somebody is really determined, they'll find a way to undo whatever obfuscation, whatever tricks you're doing to try and validate your package. The only way that you can really have a trusted execution environment is if you have a TPM, and Android phones typically do not chip with TPMs, so that's not something that we can do at this time. And there's a lot of other issues that get involved there too. Not everybody I know isn't supportive of that idea. Now, I will add that if you do want to go and have a way to ensure that your app has not been tampered with, the best approach, and this is what I'm saying is the way you can make it foolproof, is if you have some server-side code that's gated by the LVL and that has essential functionality for your app. So as a common example I like to use, let's say you have a game and you have some multiplayer functionality which depends on a server for matchmaking. Or you have some other value-added service, whether or not it's essential or just makes the game funner. I'm assuming it's a game here. It makes your app funner. You can go and send a copy of your LVL, the return value from the LVL to your server, validated on your server. And even if somebody could modify your APK, they could go and work around all the LVL checks. But when it comes time to go and access your server-side resources, if they're gated by this LVL check on your server, there's no way to work around those. The best somebody who's hacking your APK would be able to do would be able to go and completely remove whatever server-side code you've added. And like I said, if that code is essential to your game, or if it adds additional entertainment, then you've just gone and removed a large chunk the value for your APK. So that's why that's a good approach.
What would you think about using the signatures which are available in package info, so you could contact the server when you wanted to do something, supply those signatures as part of the request,
Yes,
and the server
that's
can validate
exactly what I'm
those?
recommending. So if you take a look at the documentation for LVL, we return two pieces of data. We return a string, which will say whether or not your app, whether or not the license check was successful or not, and then we go and assign that using your RSA key in the developer console. So this return is two separate variables. You should pass both of them along to your server, and then use the signature to validate that the string's not been tampered with, and ensure that that string actually says that your application has been licensed. If both of those check, then you are absolutely sure that the user has purchased it, regardless of whether or not the APK has been tampered with, assuming that this check is being done on a server that is not under the user's control. So basically, since it's server-side code, it's trusted code.
But there's also, taking a slightly different tact away from the LVL, looking just at the APK modification, there's a signatures element of the...
Okay, so you're recommending looking at the APK signature itself, not the LVL.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a separate approach.
Yeah, so the problem with checking with the APK signature is where are you going to put this check? If you're putting this check inside of your APK, then somebody could remove that check, or they could find where you stored a copy of your signature for validation against, and they could remove that as well, or change it to the attacker's signature. So again, the problem is if it's client-side code, it's not trusted code, and somebody can tamper with it. Now that's not to say that you can't make it very difficult to do this. This is where techniques like obfuscation come into play. There's a lot of different ways you can go and hide these things within your app, and if you take time to do it, you can make it take a while to go and remove these checks from your code. But like I said originally, what you are is you're buying yourself time. Eventually, assuming that your app has enough value, somebody's going, there's a lot of really smart people out there who actually enjoy trying to break these things. So somebody's going to take it as a puzzle, as a challenge, and eventually, it might take them months, but eventually they probably will find a way to go and remove it. But that being said, and this was another point that was made in the Pirates vs. Vampires talk, if you can buy yourself months of time, that's actually a lot, because especially with games, there's been a lot of studies that have been done, and most of the income from those titles comes during the first few months after release. And yes, you're going to go and have long-tail purchases over time, and you still will get some, but most of the people who buy your game are going to do it right after you release it. So if you can just go and make sure that people don't pirate it before most of those sales come in, you've already made most of the income you're going to make from that title anyway. So there's still a lot of value from the LVL, even if you don't have a server-side component. But if you can add that server-side component, that'll enhance it even further.
I suppose maybe that might not hold quite as strongly with, say, another class of applications where people are really concerned would be like enterprise apps, where you probably do see more of a gradual growth in sales rather than...
That's true.
Rather than upfront sales.
And in that case, there's other techniques you can do there too. And for example, if you do frequent updates to your app, keep adding new features, and each time you update a release, modify your LVL code so that somebody has to go and start reverse engineering everything from scratch. And so even they might eventually break it. Okay, well now they have to go and do it again, and they do it, and you release another update, and they have to break it again, and just repeat over and over again, and you can go and modify your LVL code a lot easier than somebody who has to reverse engineer it. You have comments, you have variable names, you have a lot of things at your disposal that people attacking your APK do not have at their disposal, and so you can make it very inconvenient and do especially for things like enterprise apps. You probably are, those apps, the people buying them are probably going to want whatever the latest features are, assuming that those features are actually valuable. So you can use this to go and make the pirated versions of your APK a lot less valuable. Also, I'd like to hope that enterprise users are a little bit less likely to pirate APKs. Just really hoping that, but, So,
Okay.
yeah.
Go to the next question.
Yeah, in the chat we had another one from Manus, actually.
Okay. Just follow up.
Okay, we'll see if Manus comes back in again. But he was asking...
Like from watching YouTube later, I guess.
Yeah. whether there was a good way to capture video from devices, because using DDMS, the frame rate's too slow, and pointing a video camera at the phone is a bit clunky.
Right. We actually had a question about this in the moderator queue that I saw earlier. So let's go ahead and actually address both those questions right now. So yeah, actually, do you want to go and find the
I'll find it. Yeah, you can go ahead and talk through it, and I'll find it on the moderator.
Okay. So there's a number of different ways you can go and capture video from a device. DDMS will go and capture a screenshot, as Manish said. Now, there's a couple apps out there that have gone and taken the same functionality and repeatedly request screenshots. And then they'll go and use that to create a pseudo video stream, which you can then go and display on your device. You had one that you recommended, right?
Right. Nick and Rich have recommended Droid at Screen. Is that right?
Oh no, that's the same frame rate as DDMS.
Well, no. DDMS does not. DDMS gives you a frame rate of undefined because DDMS does not do video.
Okay, but
DDMS will capture actually. Or, in theory, depending on what your sampling rate is, it could be infinite because you're taking exactly one frame. So one frame divided by the amount of time you're spent capturing that frame is quite fast. But you only get one frame. It's a single screenshot. What these apps do is they keep refreshing or requesting the screenshot over and over again. I suppose you could sit there and mash the request screenshot button.
You could, but it's still very slow.
In all cases, it is actually.
I mean, the way forward is to use the HDMI app, right?
Right. So yes, if you use one of the tools that's based off of DDMS, you're going to get roughly 1 frame per second, which is not really enough for anything that's useful, in my opinion. I could think of some ways to sugarcoat that, but I'm not going to try. It's 1 frame per second is actually pretty abysmal. If you really want to get video out of your device, and this is what we do for some of our hangouts where we actually do have video that we capture from devices, for example, the Friday review. Get HDMI out. So if it's a lot of tablets have just a mini HDMI. Is it mini or micro HDMI?
It varies.
Yeah, a lot of them do have some form of HDMI port that you can go and connect and just get a DVI or a digital video stream. And then if you want to go and show it on a laptop, or if you want to go and webcast it, you can then get a HDMI scan converter. So back in for our Hangouts we hold in Mountain View, we have a box from Matrox. I believe Blackmagic makes one as well. And just plug your device into there and use that to go and capture your video. And then you can go and get full frame rate video out from your device.
I'm guessing you might be trying to create a product video as well, perhaps for your Play Store listing. So another top tip here is to enable the Show Touches feature, which was introduced in Ice Cream Sandwich. So if you go into Settings, Development, there's a nice option called Show Touches, which will give a kind of semi-transparent circle wherever you're touching on the screen. So it makes really nice product videos. You can see what the user's doing.
Yeah. Now, one other thing you can do too, actually, well, 2 things. First off, if you're making product videos, you should also look at, I'm trying to remember, what's the tool that goes and puts a frame around screenshots?
Device Framer.
Device Framer. So there is a tool out there called Device Framer that lets you take still screenshots and put a mock phone around it. I take a look at that and grab those same frame labs and put them around your video too. Mm-hmm. So it actually looks like you're on a real device.
And you can get to that by j.mp/Android Asset Studio. There's a link there for the Device Framer.
Yeah. Now, the other thing you can do too is to use an emulator. So there is an x86 emulator. There is graphics acceleration out there, and basically the emulator doesn't suck anymore. And so because of this, with the exception of a few small classes of apps, which say you have I actually haven't tried running a 3D accelerated game. Probably still a little. I guess it would depend on the nature of the game. You should give it a try. But in any case, try running your app in one of the newer one of the newer emulators, and seeing if you actually get decent performance. And if you do, you might not even have to bother with HDMI. You could just do screen capture from your laptop.
I like that. Good suggestion.
Okay. Next question.
Sure. We are building an app that is still targeted to API level 8. By targeted at, I presume you mean you expect most of your deployment to be on API level 8. You want the best possible feature support there.
I interpret that as target SDK equals.
Right.
That's my interpretation too.
Okay, but we make use of the compatibility package. On a new device, the menu button of the action bar is visible below the app, I presume in the system bar. Is there any way to disable or hide that button? Yes, there is. You need to set target SDK level equals 11 or higher.
So 14 or higher.
if you wanted to work on an ice cream sandwich. Yeah. You can make an ice cream sandwich if you set it for honeycomb.
Oh.
Now, I think there was some confusion from the person asking this though, because they said that the target user base is running SDK level. It was 8. Now, my opinion is that target SDK should always be set to whatever the latest version of the framework is. So, yeah, I know, a little controversial there, but in any case, it should always be a recent version. And it doesn't really matter what your users are running. Basically, this is just telling the system what features you know exist at development time. And so you're saying, I know action bars exist, therefore don't show a menu button. Now, users don't have to be running that version. What determines the known version they're running is the min SDK version attribute. So, if you can set target SDK level 14, and it'll run just fine on the level 8 device, as long as you never call any APIs that were introduced introduced after level 8. Now, the good news here is, if you do need to call any of those, there are ways to go and work around it, but more importantly, yes, the SDK will warn you if you go and use them because we've added linter support. So, especially if you use Eclipse, you'll get a nice yellow exclamation point next to your source code and say, hey, you're calling a method that is not supported on all devices your APK targets, or that your APK is compatible with. Again, we know what they'll run on based on the min SDK version attribute, and say you either need to go and remove this line of code or add some gating functionality to make sure it's only called on compatible devices. And I think there's an annotation you can add to disable that warning too.
That's the precedent.
Right. So, yes. In any case, you should go and set your target SDK level to something higher than 8.
I think my feeling on this issue is that, you should encourage having a different target SDK and min SDK in your user's SDK element of your manifest. But be very, very cognizant of what you're saying is when you have a difference there, is that I'm aware of the differences between all of these SDKs. So you are basically signing a contract and saying, I, as a developer, am responsible for not calling newer APIs on all the devices, and I'm also aware that newer functionality introduced on later devices, like the action bar replacing the options menu. So, be aware of what you're saying by having those different values.
Okay. I think we've covered that. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Is there any situation when you would actually recommend setting a target SDK lower? Just in case something people need to be aware of?
I used to recommend it before we had lint support in order to go and catch cases where you are using SDKs without having, or using SDK features in cases where you shouldn't, in cases where it makes the device crash. But the problem is that when you did that, then you'd break cases where you actually do have gating logic in there to make sure that they didn't run. So it was really only useful, in my opinion, for the case where you were just incrementing this to go and get the latest, latest features like disabling the compatibility modes or enabling hardware acceleration, but you weren't actually using any method calls that weren't supported. So turning down the target SDK would have the compiler catch those for you. That's no longer an issue because we do have lint support, so it'll catch those for you regardless. I can't think of any really good reasons not to be using the latest version, honestly.
Well, you'd always charge ahead and do it. Like, so the minute Ice Cream Sandwich came out, you installed the SDK, you could set the target SDK to 14, right? But if you hadn't updated your app to not use the options menu, then there'll be no way of accessing that functionality anymore. So you wouldn't want to update it until you provided other routes to that functionality.
Yeah, so actually, there is one case actually I can think of, and that's sort of going off of what you said, is if for whatever reason you can't test your app on that SDK level. So, for example, if you set it to 14 and you don't have a device that runs Ice Cream Sandwich, and your app does not run in the emulator for some reason, I would not set it to 14 in that case because it's an untested configuration. Case in point, if you didn't know that Ice Cream Sandwich is going to remove your menu button when you do that, and you haven't added code to go and handle that, that could be bad. For the same reason, I would not set your SDK level, your target SDK level, anything greater than the latest release version, because you're then saying, I've tested my app on an SDK that does not exist yet, and who knows what's going to happen when the SDK actually does come out. Hopefully nothing bad, but that's why we have these compatibility features.
Could be a great way of getting some publicity about having an inside track on a new release.
So I actually do go and have some scripts which go and check to see what target SDK versions people use. And every now and then I actually do So I've seen some people who will actually go and set it to the one version later than it's being released. And I've seen a few cases where people actually go and set target SDK version to something in the thousands. I don't know whether or not they're thinking there. Maybe make it feature compatible for all future releases of Android. But yeah, probably not the best idea.
And don't use Maxis.
Yes, do not use Maxis.
Okay. Well, that's just gone 3 o'clock. So unfortunately, we're running out of time here. Sorry to those of you who didn't get your questions answered. I know there's a few left in the Google Plus thread. If you can add those into the moderator for next week, we'll try and get round to them. Catalin especially, we had a couple of questions in there we didn't manage to get round to.
Yeah, we had a real bumper crop of questions in the moderator this week. I believe we had 22 before we even started the Hangout today, and a couple more came in after we started. So I want to thank you very much for submitting all of these excellent questions to give us lots of information to talk about. And definitely keep up the good work, and we'll try to keep up our side of it as well, and see you next week.
Yeah, and I will add that if you add your questions in earlier, more chances will get voted up. So,
well, true, yeah. Moderator's all about the voting. Thank you to Lucas Grunberger as well.
It also gives people a chance to comment before we get to the show, too, and then you might get a quick answer.
Right. Right, well, see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Same time.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.